here I was again. I was in this spot that I had been many times in my life before. I was home. Rodney had tested positive for COVID. He was going to have another test the next day. This was July the 15th. He was going to have another test on the 16th. But here I was again with God talking to me about the word trust. Many times God had talked to me about the word trust. That's a word that we just kind of throw around, don't we? In different situations, we tell people, well, you just need to trust God. Sometimes those two words can be a little empty, especially if you are in the midst of a out of control situation, which is where I was. What is trust anyway? I mean, trust is believing in the ability of someone, believing that they can handle the situation. Well, I was in a very out of control situation and there was no way I could handle it. Rodney was in Zimbabwe and I was here in Virginia. And what if that test the next day was positive? We had already been cautioned that it could be positive. But God just started talking to me that day. Will you trust me with Rodney in Zimbabwe? Will you only trust me with Rodney's life when he's safe in Virginia? But we all know things can happen in the States just like they can in Zimbabwe. But over the years, God had given me out of control situations. When Rodney and I were married and graduated college, we moved to Texas and then on to Oklahoma while he was in seminary and pastoring. We moved away from family, we moved away from friends. And God just started talking to me about trust. Can you trust me when your family's not around, when your friends is not around? And I began to trust God in a whole new way I'd never done before. Well, when our first son was born, he was born with a malrotation and it was very serious. I was in a hospital in Ardmore, Oklahoma. They flew him to Oklahoma City, and God in that hospital in Ardmore started talking to me again about trust. Will you trust me with Jonathan's life? Will you only trust me with his life when nothing's wrong with him, when everything is fine, when he's in a bed next to you? Well, I had to answer that question that I would trust God with Jonathan's life. And God miraculously healed him. When they did surgery on him, everything was perfect the way it should be. And here God had showed me another trust lesson. There was a time when we moved back to Fort Worth for Rodney to finish up his degree. Neither one of us had jobs. We did not have money for the essentials, for food, for rent, for just the normal things. And God again said, will you trust me when you have no security of income? And we tend to trust in that security of income, don't we? If we need food or if we need rent or house payment or whatever, we will just trust in our ability to meet that need. During that time in Fort Worth, Rodney and I both had to trust God for just the essentials. But there have been many times over our lives when we've had to trust God with out of control situations with our children. Many of you have had those out of control situations. But here I was in Virginia and God was saying again, will you trust me? Will you trust my ability? Will you trust my strength? Will you trust my love? That evening on July the 15th, God was talking to me about trust, and He gave me an acrostic for the word trust. T. T is for taking God at His word with everything He says about trust. R is for running to Him to be my refuge in those out of control situations. U is for utterly being dependent on Him for these situations. S is for being satisfied with what He's going to do or not do. T is for trusting Him and not leaning on my understanding, but for trusting God for His understanding and His word. So I began again to have a trust lesson and to trust God with what God was going to do. And by the end of that night, I knew his test was positive. God had so worked in my heart about trust, and then in a still small voice, not in a loud sounding voice, but in a still small voice that night, God told me his test is going to be positive. Now I will tell you, when I read that it was positive on Friday, July the 16th, I did definitely cry because I still had hope that it would be negative. But God had already prepared my heart, and I knew that it was going to be positive. And so it is so comforting when you're in an out of control situation and God just prepares your heart. But he also teaches you about how we can trust him with every situation that we have, whether we can handle it or whether we can not handle it.